The sky above Munich was restless. It wasn't just rain clouds. It was something alive, something ancient. A living pulse of thunder rolled through the air like a warning that no one heard, or maybe no one dared to listen. Inside the Olympic Stadium, 70,000 people packed shoulder to shoulder, trembling with excitement, clutching glow sticks and banners that shimmered with condensation. The History World Tour was about to hit its peak, and Michael Jackson was minutes away from stepping into the storm. The wind carried a strange smell, electricity, and wet asphalt. Crew members on headsets whispered updates, voices crackling through the static. Lightning 10 miles out, maybe less. Soundboards showing spikes again. Keep the stage dry, people. But it was no use. Nature had already RSVP'd to the show. At 8:56 p.m., the lights went out. A collective gasp tore through the arena, and then came the roar. The giant LED screens flared to life in a blaze of red and gold, displaying Michael's silhouette frozen against a storm of sparks. A countdown began to thunder through the speakers. 5, 4, 3, each number shaking the metal framework of the roof. Then boom! Pyrotechnics ignited in a blinding ring of fire, and beat it ripped through the stadium like a detonation. Michael exploded onto the stage in his black and gold jacket, fedora tilted low. Every move a bullet of precision. He spun, kicked, and hit every beat like lightning incarnate. The rain had started to fall, but it only made him shine brighter, droplets catching the strobe lights like diamonds. From the stands, it looked surreal. Lightning bolts behind him, fireworks in front, his movements perfectly synced to the chaos of nature. Some fans swore the sky itself was keeping time with his rhythm. Then, mid-dance, thunder cracked so loudly it seemed to split the air itself. The sound rattled through the steel beams overhead, shaking camera rigs and sound towers. A flash of blue-white light tore open the sky, followed by the unmistakable metallic snap of a power surge. For a second, maybe less, the music stuttered. Michael froze. The audience screamed, thinking it was part of the act. But backstage, chaos erupted. Systems down. Power flicker on main feed. Do we pull him? The storm didn't care. It was moving directly overhead now, pounding the stage with rain, so heavy it blurred the outlines of everything. The dancers hesitated, eyes darting to the wings for instructions. The crew waved wildly, the universal signal to stop, to get off the stage. But Michael didn't move. He stood still, perfectly centered beneath the storm, staring up into the night sky. A second bolt of lightning arced across the heavens, this one so close that for an instant it illuminated every face in the crowd. Frozen in awe, the power went out completely. No lights, no sound, just thunder. The only glow came from the thousands of phones and lighters flickering weakly in the stands. The giant screens blinked once, then died. The stage, that vast cathedral of sound and light, became nothing but a wet platform in the dark. And there, alone at the center, stood Michael Jackson. For a moment, he looked like a ghost, a silhouette outlined by lightning. Hair slicked his face, water pouring down his shoulders. Backstage, a voice screamed into the comms. Get him off the stage before he's hit. But he didn't move. He raised his head slowly, eyes following the arcs of light that spidered through the clouds. The crowd, restless seconds before, fell silent. All 70,000 people held their breath, waiting to see if he would run or stay. Michael reached for his microphone. The feed was dead, but he lifted it anyway, pressing it to his lips as though it were sacred. He took off his fedora. Rain coursed down his face. Then, softly, so softly that the people in the front rows could barely hear him, he said, "We're not stopping. The sky is just trying to dance with us." A murmur rippled through the stadium, disbelief, then awe. He dropped the hat onto the wet stage and motioned for the dancers to stay back. He looked toward his band in the shadows, gave a small nod, a silent signal known only to them. The drummer hesitated. "You serious?" Michael smiled, that quiet, fearless smile that always meant trust me. Lightning flashed again, and the speakers roared back to life for a heartbeat. The sound was distorted, broken, but enough. Michael stepped forward, feet slapping against the soaked stage, and resumed his position. They told him, "Don't you ever come around here." The crowd exploded. The rain poured harder, but now it didn't matter. Every move he made sent water spraying into the air like glass shards. He slid across the slick stage, spinning under flashes of light, thunder sinking to the drumbeat like divine percussion. Crew members watched helplessly from the wings, torn between fear and awe. The stage director muttered under his breath, "He's not performing anymore, he's commanding it." Another bolt struck nearby, shaking the floor. The big screen behind him glitched, flickered, and then stabilized just long enough to capture his image, drenched, defiant, unstoppable. Every flash of lightning made him look mythic, as though the storm had crowned him in electricity. And then silence. Another surge. Another blackout. The song cut mid-chorus. The crowd groaned, voices rising in confusion. Michael stood still again, chest heaving, water dripping from his curls. He held the microphone close, even though he knew it was dead, and stared into the darkness. All eyes were on him. In that stillness, a single crack of thunder echoed like a drum roll. The wind whipped across the stadium, tearing through banners, howling through the metal beams. Someone in the crowd screamed. Another started praying. Michael didn't flinch. He turned his back to the audience, faced the storm, and raised his arms wide open as if embracing it. Lightning struck again, a searing flash that framed him in pure white light. When he turned back, the rain pouring off his face looked like tears. He walked to the edge of the stage and spoke again, voice faint but carried by wind. "Don't be afraid. Music isn't scared of the storm." The words reached no microphones, no speakers, but somehow everyone heard them. A woman in the front row would later say she could feel the sound in her bones. In that moment, something shifted. The audience, who had been screaming moments ago, fell completely silent. Not out of fear, but reverence. They weren't watching a concert anymore. They were witnessing communion, man and nature meeting mid-beat. Michael slowly lowered the mic, exhaled, and let the rain fall. Then, from the darkness, the faint sound of piano returned, a single note repeating like a heartbeat. The backup generator had kicked in. Michael smiled through the storm. He placed the mic to his lips, lifted his head toward the heavens, and whispered into the crackle of thunder, "Now let's make it beautiful." And with that, Stranger in Moscow began to play, soft, haunting, and heartbreakingly human. The storm had become part of the show. The sky wasn't the enemy anymore. It was his duet partner. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. Rain was no longer falling. It was attacking. Sheets of water slammed down from the heavens, hammering the roof of Munich's Olympic Stadium until it sounded like an ocean trying to get in. The lights flickered. The stage monitors hissed, and the sound of thunder boomed through the speakers like a second drum track gone rogue. Backstage, the show director was pale. "We need to pull him out now," he shouted into his headset. That's live voltage under his feet. But on stage, Michael Jackson stood motionless, soaked, shining, utterly fearless. The crowd didn't know what to feel. Some screamed for him to stop. Others screamed for him to keep going. And Michael, he just lifted his face to the storm and began to move again. The music returned in fragments. First a piano, then a whisper of bass, then the rhythm machine gasping back to life. The power was unstable, but Michael didn't wait. He took a deep breath and began to sing Stranger in Moscow. It wasn't the Michael Jackson the world knew. Not the showman, not the king of pop. This was the man behind the myth. Vulnerable, alone, drenched and trembling. The first line left his lips like a confession. How does it feel when you're alone and you're cold inside? The words didn't echo through reverb or auto-tune. They carried through thunder, raw and naked. Every syllable was cracked open by emotion. His voice was shaking, not from fear, but from the cold and the sheer weight of what was happening. Fans in the front rows started crying. Some reached their hands toward him, fingertips brushing the invisible barrier between stage and soul. Rain streamed down his face, mixing with tears no one could distinguish anymore. Lightning flashed behind him, each burst painting his silhouette in silver fire. The wet stage reflected every move like glass, turning him into an angel and his reflection into a ghost. He sang the second verse louder now, almost shouting over the storm. Kremlin's shadow belittling me. A KGB was dogging me. It wasn't about Russia anymore. It wasn't about politics. It was about alienation, about being seen by the whole world, and yet feeling invisible. The lyrics cut deeper in the storm, as though heaven itself had chosen to underscore his loneliness. From backstage, the crew watched in silence. A drenched technician whispered, "He's not performing anymore. He's surviving." Another whispered back, "No, he's transforming." Security guards stood frozen at the edges of the stage, waiting for the signal to evacuate, but no one dared interrupt him. No one could. Even the dancers, shivering and huddled near the wings, couldn't look away. One of them, a young performer named Lavelle, would later recall, "It felt like the rain was listening to him, like the sky was his audience now." As the song reached its bridge, the thunder roared louder, shaking the steel structure of the roof. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, so bright that every fan saw their own shadow cast across the stands. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Michael didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, water splashing around his feet. His microphone crackled, then went dead. Silence. Just the sound of rain. He didn't stop. He kept singing anyway. No mic, no amplification, just his voice against the sky. And somehow, everyone could still hear him. It wasn't magic. It was resonance. 70,000 people so silent, so locked in the same heartbeat, that even the faintest word carried. "How does it feel?" The line drifted through the air, a whisper in the downpour. From the farthest seats of the front row, fans stood still, eyes wide, hands over their mouths. No one wanted to blink and miss the miracle happening before them. The cameras, running on backup power, caught it all. Michael standing in the center of the storm, his voice barely audible, yet somehow more powerful than any stadium sound system on Earth. Lightning flashed again, and in that white-hot instant, something extraordinary happened. The audience began to hum with him. At first, just a few scattered voices near the front. Then a wave. Then thousands. Soon, the entire stadium was singing, a human choir rising into the storm. Their voices blended with his, imperfect but united. Michael looked out, eyes wide with disbelief, and lowered his hand, the signal for the band to stop. They did. Now it was just him and 70,000 people singing together under a sky of fire. No instruments, no choreography, just connection. For the first time that night, Michael smiled. It wasn't a rehearsed smile, the stage smile. It was small, tired, and utterly human. He looked up at the rain and whispered, not to the crowd, but to the heavens, "Thank you." Then, as if the storm itself answered, thunder rolled softly, not violent now, but deep, slow, like applause from another realm. Michael stepped forward again, placing his hand on his heart. His hair clung to his face. His jacket sagged with water, but he looked weightless. He sang one final line, barely audible but clear enough to pierce the soul. "We're all strangers until love finds us." He bowed his head, and the crowd roared. It wasn't the usual concert cheer. It was a sound mixed with sobs, laughter, and disbelief. People hugged strangers. Others knelt. A few simply stared upward, crying in the rain. Backstage, the director was weeping too. "We're witnessing something we'll never see again," he whispered to no one in particular. One of the sound engineers, who'd been frantically trying to save the equipment, stopped what he was doing and just listened. Later, he said, "You could hear God through the feedback." As the song ended, Michael stood perfectly still. His breath came out in white clouds against the cold air. For a few seconds, it seemed the entire world had forgotten how to breathe. Then, slowly, he raised his arms toward the heavens. Lightning flashed one last time, a clean, white burst that illuminated everything. His drenched form, the soaked crowd, the glistening rain, and then vanished, leaving only darkness and the soft patter of rain. He whispered into the dead mic, "Now you know what music really is." And then, impossibly, he moonwalked through a puddle, slow, graceful, water splashing like liquid glass beneath his feet. The fans lost it. Even with no music, no lights, no sound, he moved as if the universe itself was his rhythm. Each slide, each spin, each pause drew its own thunder from the heavens. When he stopped, he was breathing hard, chest heaving, eyes closed. The rain softened, almost respectfully. He looked out at the crowd, thousands of glowing faces, all watching, all united, and smiled through the exhaustion. "You see," he said softly, "the show never stopped." The lights flickered once, then again, then the screens blazed back to life. The generators had finally rebooted. But Michael didn't move to restart the show. He stayed still, the faintest tremor in his hands. Then, almost tenderly, he reached into the microphone again and whispered, "Thank you for staying with me." And the crowd answered with a roar that shook the very rain from the air. For them, he wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He was a prophet of resilience, drenched in faith and thunder. That night, he turned chaos into courage and a storm into a symphony. When the rain finally began to fade, so did the fear. All that was left was connection. And somewhere in the stands, a fan whispered, "The storm didn't stop him. It crowned him." For a moment, there was nothing. No music, no lights, no movement. Only the sound of rain, relentless, rhythmic, echoing through the vast steel dome of Munich's Olympic Stadium. The power had gone out completely this time. Even the emergency lights failed. The stage that had once been a temple of sound and spectacle now sat in utter darkness. 70,000 people waited in suspended silence, breaths held, hearts hammering, eyes searching the gloom for one man. And then a voice, soft, unamplified, human. "You are not alone." Gasps rippled through the stands. It was Michael, standing dead center in the black void, soaked to the bone, no spotlight, no band, just his voice, raw and trembling, cutting through the rain. The sound didn't come from the speakers. It came from him, and somehow, impossibly, everyone heard it. At first, it was just him. A single figure illuminated briefly by lightning. The flash revealing his drenched white shirt clinging to his chest, his hands shaking around the silent microphone. Then came the second line, softer, more fragile, but steady. "I am here with you." Something shifted in the air. People began turning off their phones, lowering umbrellas, quieting the chatter. They wanted to listen. He wasn't performing anymore. He was confessing. His voice cracked on the next line, and the sound that came out wasn't perfect, but it was real, pure, trembling real. By the third verse, the crowd began to join in, quietly at first, then stronger. Tens of thousands of voices, imperfect and human, rising into the storm. "You're always in my heart. You are not alone." The melody floated upward, echoing off the rain-slicked stadium walls and out into the night sky. No orchestra, no lights, just human voices and thunder. Backstage, the sound engineers froze. One of them took off his headset, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. "We lost everything," he whispered, "but it's better this way." The lighting operator leaned forward, staring at the black stage. "He's rewriting what it means to perform," he said. "Nobody does this. Nobody can." The rain began to lighten, as though the storm itself had stopped to listen. Michael looked out at the sea of glowing faces. The audience had started holding up their phones again, but not to record, to light the darkness. Thousands of small, golden lights shimmered through mist like stars reflected on water. He smiled faintly, almost shyly. For the first time all night, he looked small. Not the king of pop, not the legend, just a man standing in the rain, surrounded by the love of strangers. He gestured gently with his hand, urging the crowd to keep singing. They did, louder now, their voices swelling into something divine. In that moment, the rain and the melody became one. Every drop a note, every voice a heartbeat. A woman in the front row would later say, "It didn't feel like a concert anymore. It felt like forgiveness." Forgiveness for what? No one could say. Maybe for the chaos. Maybe for the distance between artist and audience. Maybe for all the years he had carried the weight of a world that demanded perfection. Because on that night the perfection shattered, and what remained was something infinitely more beautiful. Then, as the final chorus swelled, a miracle, or something close to it, happened. Lightning struck again, this time not with violence but brilliance. The bolt arced across the clouds, and for one breathless instant, it illuminated the entire stadium. The crowd saw it and gasped. Michael stood in the center, arms outstretched, eyes closed, bathed in white light. He looked like a man suspended between earth and heaven. A collective shiver ran through 70,000 people. Some screamed, some wept, others fell to their knees, hands over their hearts. A single fan later said on camera, "It felt like the universe was clapping." When the lightning faded, the rain softened into a whisper. The storm was dying. Michael lowered his arms and opened his eyes. Tears, or maybe rain, streamed down his cheeks. He looked around the crowd, the sea of humanity swaying in the dim glow of their lights, and for the first time, his voice broke completely. "Thank you," he whispered. It wasn't part of the song. It wasn't rehearsed. It was gratitude, raw and unguarded. The audience responded instantly, a roar of love that transcended language, thundering louder than the storm had. Somewhere high in the rafters, a camera caught his face at that moment. Lips trembling, eyes shimmering, a faint, disbelieving smile. That single frame would go on to become one of the most replayed concert moments in history. The power flickered back to life. Spotlights blinking uncertainly, screens rebooting, instruments crackling with feedback. The show could have resumed. The crew waited for a signal. But Michael didn't move. He stood in silence, the microphone still dead, as though speaking would break something sacred. The rain was almost gone now, replaced by mist. Steam rose from the stage floor where warm lights met the cold drizzle. The audience was silent too. No one dared scream his name. Then, finally, he spoke. "You see? You don't need all this." He gestured to the lights, the stage, the screens. His voice was soft, but it carried. Music, it isn't about power. It's about people. About this. He pointed toward the crowd. "All of you." The audience erupted again, not with chaos, but with reverence, clapping slowly, rhythmically, echoing to the entire arena. It sounded like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Michael placed a hand over his chest, closed his eyes, and began to sway gently to the rhythm. Soon, 70,000 people were swaying with him, strangers moving in perfect unison. He looked up again, smiled faintly, and whispered one last time into the wind. "We're one." A bolt of lightning lit up the horizon behind him, silent, distant, beautiful. It wasn't fury anymore. It was light. The cameras captured the closing image. Michael standing barefoot at the edge of the stage, hair plastered his forehead, shirt clinging to his frame, one hand over his heart, one raised to the sky. A man not conquering nature, but embracing it. The song was over. The lights were dim. But the echo of 70,000 voices singing "You Are Not Alone" lingered in the air long after the last note faded. Backstage, the tour manager whispered to a stunned technician, "Did you see that?" The man nodded slowly. "No," he said. "We felt it." That night, the footage would spread across the world. Bootleg recordings uploaded, re-aired, analyzed, worshipped. Some called it divine. Others called it madness. But everyone agreed on one thing. That night, the storm didn't interrupt the concert. It joined it. And in doing so, Michael Jackson didn't just perform. He transcended. The storm passed, but its echo didn't. By the time the lights fully returned, the night sky had cleared to a pale silver, and a faint mist hovered over the crowd like a ghost that refused to leave. The stage was soaked, glistening under the surviving floodlights, and the air carried the sweet, metallic scent of rain and electricity. Michael was still standing in the same spot, barefoot, drenched, chest rising and falling as though he'd run a marathon. The last streaks of lightning had faded into memory, but the people before him hadn't moved. Not one of the 70,000 souls who'd come to dance and scream and lose themselves had even thought of leaving. They stood in reverent silence, waiting, not for another song, but for him. And when he finally raised his hand in gratitude, the crowd erupted. It wasn't the chaotic frenzy of a pop concert. It was something quieter, deeper, applause mixed with awe, tears, and a strange collective understanding. For a full minute, Michael didn't speak. He simply took it in. The sight of faces illuminated by the faint blue glow of screens, the steam rising from the soaked arena floor, the rain still dripping from his curls. When he finally did speak, His voice came out as a whisper through the now-restored microphone. You can replace sound. You can fix lights. But you can't program love. The crowd screamed. He smiled faintly, then turned toward his band, their equipment still humming uncertainly after the blackout. Let's give the night what it came for, he said softly. They knew what he meant. He wanted Earth Song. The stage manager's voice crackled nervously through the intercom. Michael, it's not safe, the grounds. But he was already walking forward. He stopped mid-stage, kneeled, and pressed his palm against the wet platform as if feeling for the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then, slowly, he rose and gave the cue. The orchestra's opening swell filled the air, low, mournful strings rising over the hiss of dying rain. The screens behind him flickered back to life, showing images of forests, oceans, deserts, the planet breathing again after the storm. And then came that voice. What about sunrise? What about rain? Each lyric landed differently that night. The words weren't rhetorical anymore. They were real, almost prophetic. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A song about the planet crying out, sung by a man who had just faced down the sky itself. The crowd began to sing along again, softly at first, then louder, their voices trembling with emotion. Michael's body moved slower now, deliberate, almost prayerful. Every step, every gesture, every turn of his hand seemed to echo the song's message. He wasn't performing. He was pleading. What about all the things that you said we were to gain? Did you ever stop to notice all the blood we shed before? His voice cracked, but no one cared. In fact, that imperfection made it more powerful. Fans near the front wept openly. Some held each other. Others looked skyward, whispering prayers or simply mouthing the words, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. It was no longer just a concert. It was catharsis. Backstage, the crew stopped working. Every technician, every dancer, every stagehand stood frozen, transfixed by the monitors. The show director whispered, "This isn't a performance anymore. It's a resurrection." Then, during the bridge, something extraordinary happened. The clouds above the stadium began to part, just slightly at first, a small fissure of light breaking through. Then, slowly, moonlight spilled across the arena like a benediction. The audience gasped. A single white beam of light cut through the mist and landed directly on Michael as he sang the line. What about death again? He looked up, eyes closed, face bathed in light, and lifted both arms toward the sky. The band faltered. The singers behind him stopped. Even the rain itself seemed to pause. And in that silence, Michael whispered something so softly that the front row barely heard it. Thank you, God, for this night. The crowd erupted again, not with noise, but with tears and applause so pure it almost hurt to hear. When the song ended, Michael dropped to his knees. He bowed his head and stayed there for a long time, the world's greatest entertainer kneeling in gratitude before 70,000 witnesses. The band didn't dare start the next track. The audience didn't dare speak. Then, slowly, he rose, brushed the wet strand of hair from his face, and smiled. That's what music is, he said quietly into the mic. It's not about the storm. It's what comes after. Backstage, his personal assistant handed him a towel, but he waved it away. Not yet, he murmured. Let me feel it. The man nodded silently, understanding. News cameras rolled from every angle. The footage would later be played in slow motion on every major network around the world. Michael Jackson, soaked to the bone, standing on a rain-slick stage under moonlight, surrounded by thousands who just witnessed something they couldn't explain. The headlines the next morning would all echo the same sentiment. The night Michael Jackson tamed the storm. When the skies sang back. The concert that stopped time. But in that moment, none of that mattered to him. Michael walked to the very edge of the stage, close enough that the fans in the front rows could see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. He didn't say another word. He simply bowed, low, slow, and sincere. Then he placed his hand over his heart and mouthed, "Thank you." The crowd responded not with screams, but with a single unified chant that rose from the depths of the stadium. Michel, Michel, Michel. The rhythm of it was slow, steady, like a heartbeat. He smiled one last time, turned, and walked off into the shadows. Behind the curtain, his body trembled, not from fear, but from release. The adrenaline that had carried him through the chaos was fading. His makeup was gone, his eyeliner streaked, but his eyes were brighter than ever. A crew member handed him a blanket, but he didn't take it. He just sat there for a moment on a metal equipment case, head in his hands, listening to the lingering echo of the crowd. "Did they stay?" he asked softly. His manager smiled. "No one left. Not one." Michael nodded, eyes glistening. Then it was worth it. Later that night, long after the stadium emptied and the cleanup crews began sweeping puddles off the stage, a single microphone remained in the center where he'd stood. Someone had forgotten to move it when lightning flashed again in the distant sky. The metallic surface caught the light, and for just a second, it gleamed like a monument, a quiet reminder of the night the storm didn't stop the show. It sanctified it. The storm was gone, but the world hadn't stopped trembling. By dawn, the footage had already escaped Munich. Cell phone clips, handheld recordings, and bootleg camera feeds began flooding the internet within hours. People didn't know exactly what they'd seen the night before, only that it didn't feel like a concert anymore. It felt like a revelation. The headlines were immediate. Michael Jackson sings through lightning strike. When God joined the tour. The night music and nature became one. CNN replayed the same 37-second clip a dozen times an hour. The moment with a lightning burst behind him as he lifted his arms to the heavens. Commentators called it divine. Skeptics called it coincidence. But even they couldn't deny what that crowd had felt. In the days that followed, the stories poured in from every corner of the world. A father from France wrote online, "My daughter has been deaf since birth. We were at the concert. When the thunder hit, she turned to me and said she felt the music. She didn't hear it. She felt it through the rain." A woman from Brazil posted, "I came to see a pop star. I left believing in miracles." And from a fan in Japan, "When the power went out, we saw him. Not the king of pop, but Michael the man. Vulnerable, brave, human. I think that's when I truly loved him." Within 48 hours, the hashtag the night sing to the storm trended worldwide. Millions watched the grainy clips online. His silhouette against the lightning, his trembling voice, the moment the crowd sang, "You are not alone," without a single instrument. Music critics couldn't explain it. How does a man, standing alone on a dark, rain-soaked stage with no mic, command 70,000 hearts at once? Rolling Stone called it the most powerful live moment in the history of modern music. The BBC described it as a spiritual experience disguised as a concert. But perhaps the most moving comment came from someone who had been there, a lighting technician named Marcus Dean, who'd worked behind the stage that night. In an interview months later, he said, "When the lightning struck, I thought we'd lose him." Then he sang, "And I realized he wasn't fighting the storm. He was listening to it. He was in tune with it. It was like watching a man have a conversation with God, and God answered back." Michael, of course, refused every major interview request about the night. He didn't want to turn it into spectacle. When Oprah called, when CNN begged, when magazines offered millions for exclusives, he just said one thing: it wasn't about me. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. But his inner circle knew how deeply the experience had affected him. For weeks afterward, he spoke differently, softer, slower, less rehearsed. His longtime choreographer, Travis Payne, remembered walking on him one morning at Neverland, sitting by the window while rain tapped gently against the glass. He just whispered, "Do you ever wonder why storms happen when we need them most?" 2 months later, at a small charity concert in Los Angeles, he addressed the Munich night publicly for the first and only time. Midway through his speech, he paused and looked out at the crowd. The night the thunder came, he said, "I thought the show was over, but it wasn't. It was just beginning. That night taught me something I'd forgotten." He placed his hand over his chest. "It reminded me that we're not in control. Not of the weather, not of the power, not even of the moment. We can only choose what to do inside it. And I chose to sing." The audience rose in silence. Some applauded. Some cried. He bowed once, softly, and left the stage. Back in Munich, the Olympic Stadium kept a piece of that night alive. Months later, the management team installed a small plaque near the main entrance, right where fans had entered through the rainstorm. It reads simply, "On this stage, July 1997, Michael Jackson sang to the thunder, and the world listened." Below it, etched in faint script, were the words he had whispered during the blackout. "You don't need all this. Music is about people." Fans turned the spot into a quiet place of pilgrimage. Flowers, candles, handwritten letters, all appeared week after week. One note stood out, written in a child's hand. "Dear Michael, when I'm scared, I think about you singing in the rain. Then I'm not scared anymore." Years later, footage from that night resurfaced in documentaries, remastered in 4K and analyzed frame by frame. Scientists commented on the timing of the lightning strike, how it coincided exactly with the vocal break in "You Are Not Alone." Physicists called it statistically improbable. Artists called it divine timing. And the fans? They just smiled, because they already knew what it meant. One of Michael's final interviews before his passing would touch briefly on that night again. The interviewer asked if he believed in miracles. He paused, looking down, his voice a whisper. "I believe in moments that remind us who we are." And that night, the interviewer pressed. Michael smiled faintly. That was one of them. Today, decades later, fans still talk about it online. Clips still resurface every time a thunderstorm hits during an outdoor concert somewhere in the world. It's become a symbol, not a performance, but of resilience. There's a saying among those who were there that night: the thunder didn't interrupt the show. It baptized it. And they mean it, because that night, for one breathless hour, a man in the rain stopped being a superstar and became something else entirely. Not untouchable, not perfect, but real. In the end, that's what made it legendary. It wasn't the lightning. It wasn't the songs. It wasn't even the spectacle of 70,000 people singing in the rain. It was a simple, impossible truth that Michael himself had whispered that night. Words now engraved in memory, echoing through time and thunder both. The show never stopped. It became something greater. And when the rain falls at concerts now, somewhere out there, a fan will smile, lift their face to the sky, and whisper back, "Sing to it, Michael. We're still listening." If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.